Hi, this is Naganand from Ideaspring Capital. Welcome to Ideaspring's Founder in Focus podcast series, where I'll be in conversation with our founders who are building some great startups from India in science and technology. Parithi, welcome to Ideaspring's Founder in Focus podcast series. We would love to start off by asking you about why Okulo? What made you start Okulo?
Mm. Good morning, Arvind. Thanks for having me here. So Akulo is a manifestation of a dream for about 10, 15 years. Uh, early in my childhood, I got a fascination towards uh, things that move in the sky. First, the fascination towards the stars and astronomy, and later towards anything that flies and aeronautics. So Okulo Aerospace is a deep tech aerospace startup focusing on the development of long endurance drones and pseudo satellites for persistent monitoring use cases. So, in that respect, my fascination towards aeronautics started when I was in about sixth or seventh standard, and gradually I built uh, my knowledge base in these areas through my undergraduate at NIT Trichy. Following that, I did my master's and PhD in aerospace engineering from Purdue University. Always wanted to work in the aerospace domain. After that, I went and worked with Raytheon Technologies, who are the largest aerospace suppliers in the world. During my time in the US and in Europe, I realized that uh, aerospace development was mainly concentrated in the West, primarily in the US and Europe. And I felt India, with its growing ambitions, uh, there was a need for complex aerospace development to happen out of the country to serve India's need, also to develop from India for larger parts of the world, which are currently not being served. So a little bit of uh, patriotism also motivated by this. Also strategic reasons as to we felt a market need in India and wanted to exploit that.
Yeah.
Uh,
So you alluded to the fact that patriotism and wanting to build a complex technology startup from India. But with your background, you could have done startups or worked for very good companies doing some very challenging work in other parts of the world, right? Whether it's Europe or US, whatever it is. But what what gave you the confidence that you can come to India and build something out of India?
so I always felt India had the talent. Uh, uh, Things are changing now, but what felt was India was not lacking the confidence. We had the talent, we had the brain power, but the confidence to build great things out of India was not there. And I felt maybe I could make a change in that direction, show that Indians and great products, even in complex domains like aerospace, could be built from the country. So the US did provide those opportunities where I could have stayed in the US, worked for the giants in the aerospace domain. Uh, but I felt my impact on whatever gets developed would be minimal. Whereas if I come to India, develop something in the country, I could serve the local need in a much better fashion, which other aerospace giants couldn't. I will also inspire some of the folks in the country to take up entrepreneurship, even in these deep tech domains, hard tech domains that were currently not being the focus. Um, as of course, we see that in the last 5 to 6 years, there's been a lot of great startups coming up in this domain. I'm happy to be part of that progress and play a role in this.
So in terms of Okulo, right? Take us to your journey of from inception to where you are today, onto some of the key challenges you have faced,
Mm.
and some of the positives also that you have seen, because I think there's always a good mix of these two. So if I were to ask you, to talk about these, what would those be?
Yes. So I'll just take a step back. I'll just talk about the inspiration for Okolo and then talk
Mm.
about Okolo's journey. So when I'd gone to the US to do my postgraduate studies, I always felt that I would come back. Didn't know when or what I would be working on. But there's always an inclination to develop things on your own, be part of a larger impact. So after my graduation, I felt that I needed a little more uh, industrial experience. So I worked with Raytheon Technologies in Europe, and after about a couple of years, I felt it was the right time to come back to India. And also coupled with this was India's growing ambitions to stand on its own right in terms of technology development. Um, So came back to India in about 2018 and explored and dabbled a few ideas in the aerospace domain. And in 2019, we started Okulo Aerospace, uh, primarily with the notion that improving flight time of drones or anything that flies could be valuable in the enterprise and defense sectors. Um, of course, I since I'm first time founder, I was a little naive in thinking that things would be rosy when you come back and you can raise funds, you can build a team quite easily from with similar to how it's done in the West. But that was quickly put down to bed, and I realized it is slightly harder to develop these products out of there because the ecosystem is not developed. The understanding is
And it
still
continues to be a challenge.
continues to be a challenge even today. Um, Much better today, but back in 2018, 19, very hard to convince people to take risks and join a startup that's developing these complex products. Even convince investors to take bets on us. Um, but one thing that we did right was we spoke to a lot of customers, understood the problem, validated if the problem exists in the sector. So I think the first year of our inception in 2019 up to the pandemic, we spent a lot of time talking to customers. We also spoke to investors and realized that they needed a little more evidence of this technology working out. So a prototype or some working solution. And luckily, grants came to our aid. We realized that India has, at least for a prototype development, a significant amount of money in terms of grant and aid schemes where you founders don't have to dilute equity, can get to a stage where
Did you use the IDEX grant for this, or
yes. So IDEX is one of the major grants that we got. IDEX stands for Innovation for Defense Excellence, which primarily focus on technologies for the Indian defense sectors. So we were one of the earliest recipients of that award, through which we're developing a long-range drone solution for the Indian Army. So we leveraged IDEX and a few other grants and gradually developed the first prototype and showcased it to investors. Uh, we did speak to about 40, 50 investors before we landed with Ideaspring Capital. So, what
was it
we
good or bad that you spoke to
no,
40?
it was good learning experience. Nevertheless, right, for a first time founder, talking to a set of people who have different perspectives, looking at your business opportunity from a different lens, where founder is already biased in how they think it will work out. Uh, Convincing them and showing evidence of how this will pan out, how outcomes will be beneficial for all stakeholders. Talking to investors of different kinds and convincing them of the possible outcomes and how it will benefit all stakeholders was a challenge. Uh, we spoke to about 40, 50, and since Deeptech was still in its inception in those days, it took a while for us to convince investors. Luckily, we had Ideaspring Capital on board and who were already willing to take bets on these slightly longer gestation periods, deep complex products, deep tech products. Um, we spoke with yourself, we spoke with the rest of the members of the team, and we found there was a good rapport and understanding of the risks involved and the potential involved. So that's something that resonated with us. And uh, thanks to Ideaspring Capital, we had our first investment in 2023. And since then, uh, Ideaspring Capital has been helpful in fine tuning how we develop the products for the right customers, the right product for the right customers, and how do we generate value for all stakeholders. So, thank
No, I'm also glad we are working with you. Very happy to be working in these kinds of startups.
you.
But coming back to the question on the challenges, like I will split it into two. One is the technical challenges, and one is the market challenges, right? And then market, would love to get your thoughts on how we are addressing the market also, like because with the India market, outside market, what is your plan? But let's talk about, since Ideaspring and you, we are all very technology focused guys. Now, would love to understand some of the key technical challenges you have faced in building this kind of a product in India. Now, what are some of that you said, shit, this is really, really painful.
So, two major areas of challenges. One is getting the right talent to build the product. The second is having the right ecosystem to build it. And I mean ecosystem, the supply chain ecosystem, because aerospace development requires a lot of tiered supply chains to come together to build a product of this scale and complexity. So the first challenge, which is talent, unfortunately, we most of the brightest minds in the aerospace sector also tend to leave India and go abroad and settle abroad. So finding people who have the passion to develop these products, play the long game, and come to a startup which is in its infancy has been something that we had to face. Of course, we are in a much better shape now, but in the initial days, we had to convince various people, hey, this is a technology that you could part of the future. Getting them on board was time consuming and a big challenge. Um, but I think the ecosystem has also matured now that people think startups as a viable career option, which is good to see. So
There's a stark difference from when you started to what you
to right now, I think a lot of evangelizing has happened even from the investor side to show that this is a viable career path, and even um students and professionals are willing to take those risks because they see its possibility to get larger outcomes, which otherwise might not be possible in their current career path. So that has improved, but still a challenge. The talent ecosystem, uh, the quality of the concentration of high quality talent is limited to a few pockets within the country. Bangalore is a good example of it, but if you want to expand to other states and other parts of India, that's a challenge that it has to mitigate. The second is, since aerospace domain in India itself is limited to the public sector undertakings and a few major big large companies, the ecosystem for small drone development has been limited. We had to import a lot of our components and subsystems from vendors abroad. Um, it has been improving with a lot of push from the government towards drone development. India is touted to become the largest drone hub within the end of the decade. So that push from the government has helped, and we see that ecosystem of tier one, tier two suppliers becoming better. Uh, but if that ecosystem were to exist, I think the development of these products and the time scale and uh, risk associated with it would greatly reduce. Uh, Improvement steps in the right direction, but we still have a way to go. Yeah.
but then, like, I mean, I fully agree with you on the talent part, and I have also written about these things. For India to be recognized as a science and tech startup capital, I think a lot more needs to happen. And to your point, I think you brought a very good point where the 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 important talent or the key talent should still stay back, because many PhDs and anybody, even from IITs, well, all the people who want to do PhD go out of India. Nobody stays back. Yes. I think, hopefully we'll see that flip happening sometime.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to the market, I know, it took you time to build the product, and then now you have working models of the product that you can actually, deploy in the field. How do you see the market evolving? Because, for these kind of deep tech, or tech projects which has a lot of complexity in it, I always believe that, first you have to prove yourself in the local market before you start reaching out to other markets across the world, right? Because unlike typical software products, can sit and deploy anywhere.
Yeah.
I think there's a serious challenge in terms of marketing these kind of products. So how are you preparing yourself for that, and, on that journey, and what are you seeing in the Indian market today?
So I'll explain the use case so that it gives you the context on what kind of markets with. Uh, so we are looking at aerial data acquisition on a persistent basis. So any industries that want to derive insights or decisions based on the data, aerial data that we captured, and the frequency, if the frequency is high, those are the use cases that we are targeting. So the first way of drone data acquisition is for surveying and mapping use cases where the frequency of aerial data is ad hoc and once in 5 months or once in 6 months, right? But because of the lack of predictability, scaling of those kind of operations is going to be limited. We specifically targeted use cases where there is a high frequency of aerial data acquisition, mainly in surveillance use cases on the defense as well as on the enterprise. Um, and because this is a new set of use cases, evangelizing the customer base on saying that this is a possible way of solving this problem took a while. I think the Indian market is gradually warming up to that, and we see adoption happening. One thing that India probably has an advantage compared to, let's say, mature economies like the US is our integration of the airspace to the existing commercial airspace is not a big challenge. We have very few commercial aircraft flying in the air, and there has not been a general aeronaut uh, aircraft ecosystem in the country. So integrating the drone airspace is not as a challenge like in the US. Uh, we are using India as a test bed to get to product market fit. We see any hardware that gets built, the customer base has to be nearby so that you can deploy and get that feedback loop and attain product market fit. So in that respect, we feel India could be a good test bed for us. We also see a lot of government reforms pushing the drone sector. So maybe we just timed it or we got lucky to be
You need luck. In startup, you need one thing you absolutely need is luck. So
yeah. So even though when we started, it was not the government's mandate, but the government is pushing and wants to promote India to be the major drone player in the world. So in that respect, we see a lot of activities from the government and in enterprise to start testing out these solutions. We will gain a foothold in the Indian market, attain product market fit. Then we want to expand to the Middle East, where we see a lot of opportunities for our kind of products to be deployed, mainly in the enterprise sector and also on the defense side. Uh, After expanding into these, the largest market is still North America, primarily the US, and we feel given the cost structure and the innovation that is now possible within the country and into our products, we can even venture into those markets and make a dent. And even the US Department of Defense is opening up to private players, even from other countries, engaging with them. So we see a change in how enterprises and defense sector is opening up to players within the country to a large extent through programs like IDEX and other reforms in the defense acquisition procedures, and even countries like the US, where primarily restricted to those countries' suppliers, they're opening up to other countries.
and one of the things I think we are also seeing in India is, the defense sector opening up to work with startups. And I think that's a huge change in the country. And I think that is to our belief in Ideaspring also, we believe, and that's one of the reasons why I invested in Okulo and few other companies as well. And that's what we believe will spur the innovations, the technical innovation that will put the country in the forefront. And then very excited about that part of it. Needless to say.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, I'm biased towards aerospace and defense. If you see the history of innovation, even in the US, the defense has been the first adopter of any radical innovation, right? And then it's spread to commercial use cases. And luckily, India has also understood that that could be a path towards the technological supremacy. Uh, IDEX is one, and they've gradually increased the amount of grants and engagement with yours. And because of this, the private industry is also gaining confidence on dual use technologies, which could be applied to the enterprise sector. So our focus has been to develop these dual use technologies, deploy it in the defense, which could be our early adopters, and then transition the same technology to enterprise use
And
cases.
there's two things that really appeal to us outside the fact that you were the founder is one is the fact that it had both a private and the defense use case. That was very, very important. And that's what we look for in most of the companies we invest in. And secondly, I think we are very intrigued by what you're doing in terms of the hybrid. But we are not seeing many hybrid drones that had both battery and solar. So how did you look at putting solar on the drones and then building this hybrid drone? Because there are very few, to my knowledge, at that time there were very few drones. Now probably there are more. So I would love to hear from you what made you think about that and execute on that.
So I was familiar with solar electric drones from say 2010 onwards. I knew they existed and could be designed. But primarily, our choice of the solution was motivated from the customer's problem. So when we spoke to various customers and understood that flight time is a limitation that prevents them from adopting drone solutions, yeah, we looked at various technology options on how we could solve this. And one such option is solar electric hybridization. We looked at fuel electric options, pure electric, pure fuel, even hydrogen based aviation. And for the use cases that we are targeting, we felt that solar electric was the right sweet spot where the technology was fairly mature that we could implement it in a few years. And the economics of it made it profitable. So we didn't want to work on a technology that might be profitable 10 years from now. We wanted to monetize it as soon as possible. So that was one of the motivations. Second is, as a company, we want to promote sustainable aviation. So a choice of solar electric propulsion was also motivated by this. And through this, we're also developing a new class of aerial vehicles called HAPS, or high altitude pseudo satellites. These are drones that fly for months and weeks altogether in the air. A new way of looking at aerial data and the kind of data we can.
But you don't get the same resolution or the quality, right? These are two different use cases. One is could be for communication and lesser granular surveillance, and the one that we currently have in the product is for high resolution and different use case.
Yes, slightly different use cases, but the engineering architecture is still the same. Okay. How we develop these drones, the process is still the same. So we didn't want to change our technology stack a lot, but we felt that this is the future in terms of what kind of aerial data needs to be acquired for immediate decision making and anomaly detection. Our low altitude long endurance drones meet the requirements. Uh, with HABs, you can create different communication networks that are currently not available. And there are some benefits with respect to satellites in terms of the higher quality of data resolution, rapidly deployable, the low cost nature of it. This is going to be part of the future, and we hopefully will build that.
And to do HAPS, what certification or what approvals you need? Can anybody and everybody fly HAPS, or do you need approvals from government bodies to fly HAPS?
So that regulation is still being developed. What is the regulatory framework on which HABs can be deferred? Currently, that airspace is in the control of the Air Force of that respective country.
Okay.
So there has been committees developed to figure out a framework on how apps could be deployed. It's still a work in progress, but you can clearly see that committees are being formed because there is a growing interest in these kind of solutions. And gradually, there'll be low altitude drones, HAPS, satellites. So our entire airspace up to, let's say, 200, 300 kilometers will be segregated, and certain kind of aerial vehicles will operate in that space. Definitely going to be a part of future. It's more a question of when rather than if.
Okay. And then what technology challenges you think you'll face in scaling what you have today? Low altitude drones to HAPS. Do you need to hire extra defense talent, or this talent will scale? Or what do you think you'll face?
So talent is always a chance you need as we develop new types of systems. There with increasing complexity, experience does come in handy. So if anyone who has worked in similar complex projects, either in India or abroad, we're happy to take them in. That's one challenge. The second, as I said, regulatory landscape needs to evolve to accommodate these kind of systems. And uh, very few companies have managed to get this right, even though there have been solar electric drones from the last 20 years, very thin margins of error. So the engineering has to be at a cost structure that is useful for the customer. So that challenge is always there. So the economic investment required, I don't see it as a big challenge. I'm sure because the business outcomes are there, I'm sure investors will warm up to that idea as we go forward. But getting it to an industrial level engineered product and the regulation catching up to it is something that we need to figure out. But in terms of our ability to do it, we are entirely confident that we could achieve it we can show demonstrators in a year or so, and that can be done. We have done the necessary groundwork, and hopefully we'll have the bandwidth and resources to achieve it in the next couple of years.
So, your vision for Okulo next 3 to 5 years. What's your vision, and what are some of the key challenges you think you'll have to surmount to hit your vision?
So the vision for Okulo is to be the premier aerial data acquisition provider in the sky. So we see ourselves, or people know us as a drone company today making hardware, but we will transition into a data acquisition platform where our hardware devices happen to be wherever people need data, and we derive data insights from the data that we capture. So that is the transition and vision. And because of HAPS and similar devices, we are enabling a new class of aerial data acquisition that is currently not being provided. And this is useful in surveillance, useful in enterprise security detection, and so on. So that is the long-term vision. That one challenge is we have been talked about is investment. Indian VCs, we can raise investment from Indian VCs to an extent, but of course, the amount of capital required for large-scale deployment of systems requires a large amount of capital, and hopefully, we'll surmount that challenge. It's still a challenge, a nascent ecosystem, VC ecosystem in the country for hard tech, uh, but I believe that is gradually warming up. Uh, Defense opening up is a big boon, but the enterprise sector also needs to adopt these solutions in a much more rapid fashion. The risk taking of Indian enterprises needs to improve, because I'm sure there are a lot of startups who can really add value, but they are looking at the West or other parts of the world because the Indian enterprise sector is not willing to pay for it. Hopefully, that will change. That is something is still a challenge, and if that is surmounted, I believe the Indian market itself is big enough for a lot of startups to thrive. Uh, the third challenge is, as I said, regulatory approval for these kind of use cases. That is something we'll have to. With the growing polarization in the world, there's a need to develop certain technologies indigenously uh, to make India a great country, a great power. Uh, so, continuous government support is needed. Government is the early adopter of these technologies. Defense could be one, even other parts of the government. This
Like the
is
BSF or
the BSF, the railways, for example, could be one. This has always been in the case. In the US, the government and the defense has been the early adopters of any path-breaking technology. Be it in the rocket space, be it AR, VR also started off with the defense, right? So if India could take that step and Indian government could do that, I'm sure the VCs will also warm up to that idea.
and that's already happening. I
Yeah.
mean,
It's step in the right direction, yes. And kudos to the government to take the step. As I said, we might have timed it right, or we just got lucky. Happy to be in this space with this. Yeah.
lovely, lovely, and wishing you all the best in achieving your vision. And we're always here to support you. And we like to see more science and technology startups emerge out of India and building for the world. And thanks for your time. And it was awesome talking to you as always. And wishing you and your team the very best.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan, and happy to have you mentor us, and hoping to continue this journey for a long time.
Absolutely. Look forward. Thank you,
Thank
Parithi.
Thank you.